Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with another Breeders' Cup preview, and this one's focused on Steve Asmussen and his contenders for the 2024 Breeders' Cup at Del Mar. Now, before we get into the details of this video, I want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. Subscribing is completely free of cost and just notifies you every time a new video drops, and we got a lot dropping on the channel. We have the pre-entry videos already up where I go through all 14 races and discuss the pre-entries for those. A great way to start getting you ready to pre-handicap maybe a little bit before the draw on Monday. We also have more of these trainer-specific videos focused on Bob Baffert, another one on Bill Mott. We have more coming as well. Todd Pletcher, Aiden O'Brien, Chad Brown, Brad Cox. We got plenty of other content coming for you. And then we're going to have Breeders' Cup Classic contender videos for you as well to get you ready for the biggest race in the sport. So we got you covered. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to be covering Keeneland Saturday. We're going to be covering Belmont at the Big A Saturday. So we got you covered, not just for the Breeders' Cup, but for your average everyday races here at NYRA Bets as well. All right, well, let's dive into Steve Asmussen, a trainer who has had a lot of success over the years. Obviously, some big wins with Curlin, with Gun Runner, and talk a little bit about his historic success in the Breeders' Cup, some trends that we've seen, how he's done at Del Mar, and then we'll talk a little bit about his 2024 contenders, show some race replays, discuss those in a little bit more depth. Now, in terms of how he's done at the Breeders' Cup over his career, 80 starters. I think that surprises people a little bit, that it's as few as 80 starters, because I think Steve Asmussen has been around forever for a lot of us. But only 80 starters, 8 wins, 10% win rate. That win rate is honestly right around where you see most of major trainers. You know, when you look at Chad Brown, when you look at Aiden O'Brien, when you look at Todd Pletcher, Bill Mott, Bob Baffert, they're all right around there between 10 and 13%, basically. Really, it's just Brad Cox and Charlie Appleby that are somewhere up in the stratosphere, winning at 27 and 42% respectively, that are just kind of otherworldly. In terms of hitting the board, his starters have done pretty well. 25 to 80 hitting the board, 31%, which is slightly above average in terms of comparing it to maybe where some of the other major trainers are. So I think that that's something notable to point out. But what is so fascinating to me is not just looking at the career numbers overall, but really looking closely at how these numbers have accumulated over time. And what I mean by that is 36 of his 80 starters have come in the last 6 years since Gun Runner. In many ways, Gun Runner changed the trajectory of Steve Asmussen's career as it relates to the Breeders' Cup. Steve Asmussen was always a great trainer, but it was interesting to see he didn't really have a lot of Breeders' Cup starters. And there would be years where he didn't have any, or he'd have one, or maybe two. And he was not a major player in the Breeders' Cup in terms of a lot of different divisions with a lot of different horses. And all of a sudden, you have Gun Runner win in 2017. And since then, you have seen him have significant groups every single year coming after that. So nearly half of his career starters are just in the last 6 years. Now, some of that in recent years is that Gun Runner has turned into quite a prodigious sire. And so now he's gotten all these offspring of gun runners, and he's become kind of a guy you send gun runners to. And so it's quite fascinating to see how that's kind of also given him maybe a little bit more of another career. So really fascinating to see. At Del Mar specifically, he's had some success. A horse like Echo Zulu a couple of years ago won the filly and juvenile fillies out there at Del Mar. So 9 career starts, 2 wins, but only hit the board twice with those 2 winners. Hasn't really, been competitive outside of those 2 victories. But hey, if you win 2 out of 9, that's a pretty good rate that you're going at. But bottom line, it shows he's had the success shipping. I think that more so than anything. 9 is a small sample size. You don't want to extrapolate too much from that. But it just does show, listen, he's got a professional operation. He knows how to ship out there. He knows how to get his horses ready. East Coast, Midwest horses, they're going to run well on the West Coast. He might not do it often, but it shows that he's successful at doing it at least, and that they've handled the surface at Del Mar. He knows knows how to get them ready for those types of conditions. So, I certainly is a trainer that I have a lot of respect for. He's got a lot of nice horses this year. all in the sprint division. It's interesting. He's got nobody on Friday, no juvenile runners on Friday, and all of his Saturday runners are sprinters. And let's talk about these sprinters because it is quite a group. And Gun Pilot, Skelly, Zeitlos, Society, and Cogburn. We'll save the best for last with regards to Cogburn. But really interesting to see this group of 5 sprinters here. And the fact he's got 2 in both the sprint and the filly and mare sprint. And then obviously Cogburn, like I said, in the turf sprint. So let's talk a little bit about these horses. And we'll actually start with Society. And we'll go in the order that these races are going to be run on Saturday, which is we'll start with the filly and mare sprint, which is going to be the first of the Breeders' Cup races run on Saturday. And that's going to be race 4 on the card at 3 o'clock. And we'll start with Society because I think this is just such an interesting horse. I was on hand a couple of years ago when Society won the Cotillion. And I thought, man, this is going to be a really special horse. And she's been a really good horse, but I don't know if she's ever taken that next step. Now, maybe she's on the verge of that, but she's also been a horse that I feel always needs the right setup and the perfect setup and the perfect trip. And if she doesn't have that perfect trip, if she gets pushed a little bit or, if things might not work out exactly right for her, then sometimes it just goes south and she ends up finishing off the board. She finished 4th in this race last year to Goodnight Olive, Ugiri, and 3 Witches, and was coming into that race off of 2 100-plus buyer speed figure efforts in the Pink Ribbon at Charlestown and the Chicago at Ellis Park. And so was coming in very good form. Now, you could argue had not run that recently, had only run, like I said, in that Pink Ribbon, going 2 turns actually at Charlestown in August. Interestingly enough, same sort of prep season this year. So this year, she's only run twice. She takes a long layoff after that filly and mare sprint. Asmussen gives her plenty of time to get recovered, comes back, runs in the grade 3 Chicago again, loses to Vava and Positano Sunset, finishes 3rd that day after getting up on the lead in a 5-horse field, and then comes back and runs probably the best race against the best competition that she's ever had. And that's winning the grade 1 Ballerina and doing it pretty impressively by 3 1/4 lengths over Scylla and Vava. And that was I think a notable effort. And we're going to take a look at this. But again, kind of a perfect trip in that she stalked the pace of Money's Gold and then was just kind of in perfect position. She's already overtaken Money's Gold here at the top of the stretch. She's moved into the lead, the number 4 horse with the white blaze, and she's now just let loose by Tyler Gaffleone, and she's able to pull away. And Scylla, who I think is a really nice horse, but was running on 3 weeks rest after shipping across the country, is not able to really just chasing, not able to make up ground. Society is getting stronger as she continues to go on. Vava, who usually gets stronger in a race at 7 furlongs, is kind of losing a little bit of ground. It was easily the most complete effort we've seen from Society to date. And she's, like I said, she's a really, really nice horse. Sired by Gun Runner, of course. We talked about Gun Runner and the impact that it's had with Asmussen over the last couple of years. And she's certainly one of those big ones that is capable of dazzling efforts and is capable of really big efforts. The question is whether or not she's going to get it in this race. Because if you look at this race, you got Vava still. Yeah, that's going to be a problem. And she's a real nice horse. Now, she hasn't really hit the triple-digit speed figures the last 2 times out, which might be a little bit of a concern. But she should be well rested. She's been working out great for Cherie DeVaux leading up to this race, and is another Gun Runner, by the way. Then you got Ways and Means. Ways and Means is a problem because Ways and Means is the 3-year-old who has just been so dominant since cutting back to really doing 1-turn races after finishing 4th in the Kentucky Oaks. And she absolutely blew out a field against older competition at Saratoga, going up against Allowance Company, then winning the grade 1 test, and then coming back in the slop to win the grade 2 Gallant Bloom over older fillies and mares. So I thought incredibly impressive horse. That's going to be a horse that's going to be a problem to deal with as well. And again, all these horses kind of like to be up on the lead. And, you have a horse like One Magic Filly who's going to be in this race who likes to get up to the front as well. Scylla should be pretty forward. Society will be forward. And that, Vava's not going to be too far away, and Ways and Means is going to be pretty forward, stalking the pace. But Society might be able to get the speed of the speed, might be able to just get out up front. Question is whether or not she gets hounded by a horse like Ways and Means, who might be able to apply a little bit of pace pressure and might just be continually getting better every single start at this distance. So she's going to be one of the top choices on the board because of that victory in the Grade 1 Ballerina. Like I said, has not run since late August. Should be fresh, obviously, for this race. And it will be fascinating to see. Now, he's got another horse in this race, Zeitlos, sired by Curlin, his other winner of the Breeders' Cup Classic. So, these horses mean a lot to him because of who they're sired by. And anytime you've seen Steve talk about this, you've definitely seen that emotion come out. Zeitlos is an interesting horse in that this is a horse that has the ability to come from off the pace, but really has never run at 7 furlongs. Ran at 7 furlongs way back, going back last year, going against Allowance Company, and finished third. So, some decent horses like Undervalued Asset, but really has been carving out a niche at 6.5 furlongs. And, is coming off a win of the Thoroughbred Club of America in Grade 2 at Keeneland. It looked really good doing it. Beat a horse like Bright Work, beat a horse like Spirit Wind. So, beat some nice horses in that race and should appreciate if there's a little bit more pace. So it's interesting to see how these two horses kind of, I don't want to say they complement each other, but Society's going to be up on the front end. Zeitlos is going to be coming from a little off the pace. You would imagine 7 furlongs will set up nicely for Zeitlos, even though she's not really run at that distance before. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not she appreciates the stretch out. She is a very nice runner, and we have that last victory here where she's, turning for home and just kind of coming from off the pace. And like I said, you have some nice horses here like Spirit Wind and certainly like Bright Work, and yet she's able to dive down to the inside and get the victory here, coming from well off the pace. A really smart move, a ground-saving ride, and is able to draw off. And you can see it certainly looks like she's getting stronger as she gets to the wire, is able to beat that field. I think that is a interesting horse to think about using at a bigger price, and certainly one that I think is capable of a big effort and a surprise effort, perhaps, simply because of the way this race shapes up. If they go too fast up front, she's a horse that will benefit. One of the things I've talked about is when we look at how the track has played at Del Mar, historically, you want to be close to the pace. But when you look at the Breeders' Cup races, generally speaking, there's a hot pace in Breeders' Cup races, and you're more likely to see horses sometimes coming from off the pace because of pace meltdowns and too much pace pressure, particularly when you're going 7 furlongs in a Filly and Mare sprint. So could things fall into her lap if too many of these horses try to press the pace, or can Society just carve out the lead up front and just get out up front and go? That's when she does her best. Whether she's going 2 turns or 1 turn, when she gets an easy lead, she's a hard horse to beat. But she's got to get the perfect trip, I feel like, a lot of times in order to get that victory. So 2 very serious horses to deal with there in this race. And then let's head to the Turf Sprint, which will be the next race on the card. And this really is the feature horse for Steve Asmussen, I feel like, this weekend. And that is, of course, Cogburn. Cogburn is such a cool horse. And I say that because Cogburn was a horse that had a nice career on the dirt. He was a perfectly good dirt sprinter. He was maybe not, he finished second in the Chick Lang. He finished second in the Bachelor Stakes. This was a graded stakes placed dirt sprinter and was a nice horse. Maybe not quite up to snuff. Some of those races in the Whitmore and things like that, wasn't quite good enough to go up against the best competition. But all of a sudden, last year at Lone Star of all places, Asmussen decides we're going to switch this horse over to the turf. And my God, you've unleashed a freak of a turf sprinter on the world, because this horse has now rattled off 6 wins in 7 starts, with the only loss being the turf sprint at Kentucky Downs last September, where he lost by less than a length. And oh, by the way, he came back this year and completely made up for that loss by winning in dominating fashion in that same race and running a 107 Beyer speed figure. The 3 races this year have been unbelievably good. The turf sprint at Churchill Downs, I was all over him that day. That was probably my best bet of the Kentucky Derby weekend, was getting him at 8-1. And you're never going to get him at 8-1 again. Now, thank God, usually I'm on him a race too late sometimes, but I was on him that day at 8-1. That was a good one. But came back in the Jaipur, pulled away up here in New York, and then went down to the Kentucky Downs. And like I said, made up for that loss last year and was able to get the victory and get the job done. We are going 5 furlongs, which is shorter than most of his races, where he's going 5.5. He has won at 5, obviously. He's won into 2 Lone Star races at 5 furlongs. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how this race shapes up, because this is easily the toughest field he's faced, because you have Bradsell and you have a lot of other nice horses in this race. Believing, who I think is a really nice horse. You have Big Evs, who's coming over, who won the juvenile turf sprint last year here. This is as good a field as he's going to face. And now we're going to see just how good Cogburn really is. And speaking of how good he is, here's that last effort in the turf sprint at Kentucky Downs. And you can see him up on the lead. And Irad Ortiz Jr. is not really even asking him to do much. And then we're going to get the always fun camera shift here at Kentucky Downs. And now we're going to, now he's just pulling away. I mean, he's just toying with competition. And this is a track that horses traditionally can struggle over because of how unusual it is. And he just has taken to every single surface he's run on the grass. He's run over soft ground. He's run over firm ground. He's run over undulating ground like this, pristine surfaces. It doesn't matter. He's just shown so much class. He's going to be a horse that a lot of people are going to single. My concern with Cogburn is A, this is the best group he's ever faced. B, this is 5 furlongs and a very short run up to that turn. And I always worry about, obviously post position is going to be important. If he draws an inside rail or something like that, that could be a little tricky. He's never broken from the inside rail in a turf sprint before, so something to keep in mind. He has drawn the inside rail before in other sprints and has won from the inside rail. In fact, he's done it twice and broke his maiden from the inside rail, going 6 furlongs at Churchill. So is capable of doing that, but still, you wonder. Has outstanding early speed. And that's going to be the name of the game, is just getting out up front and going. And the 5 furlongs should be even better potentially for him than going longer. Like I said, 2 things are concerning. One, quality of the field. Like I said, I think Bradsell's a horse I've liked for a long time coming over from Europe. And Bradsell's a horse that has 2 grade Group 1 victories this year in the Nunthorpe and the Flying 5, winning at York and Curra. And then is coming off a 2nd place finish over soft ground at Longchamp. And that was during the ARC weekend. And I just think this is a really, really nice horse that's just continuing to get better for trainer Archie Watson. I was high on this horse last year. Didn't really quite have the year I thought he was going to have last year. And this is the year he's really kind of shown up with Holly Doyle aboard and done so well. So he's facing tough competition. And the other concern is the Kentucky Downs angle. And if you follow Ed DeRosa from Horse Racing Nation, if you follow me on social media, I've talked about this before. Horses that do their last prep race at Kentucky Downs since 2013 have not won in the Breeders' Cup. I believe their collective record is 0 for 53. And they're 0 for 53 at the Breeders' Cup since 2013, with their final prep being at Kentucky Downs, and 0 for 18 in West Coast turf races. That's the goose egg that we're dealing with, is that Kentucky Downs curse to some extent, and whether or not Cogburn's good enough to overcome it, we'll see. But he is undoubtedly going to be probably your heaviest or second strongest favorite of the whole weekend. I think Victoria Lake for Aidan O'Brien might be the biggest favorite in the juvenile fillies turf. But outside of that, I think, Cogburn's going to be your heaviest favorite of the week. So certainly your heaviest favorite on Saturday. Now let's go and talk finally about the sprint, which is a little bit later on the card. And in fact, is after the Breeders' Cup Classic. It's going to be race 10 and is going 6 furlongs on the dirt. And this is where you have Gun Pilot and Skelly. And what I'll say about this sprint field is when you look at the pre-entries, remember, a horse like Domestic Product is likely going to the dirt mile, as well as a horse like Mufasa is going to the dirt mile. Those are two, I think, pretty serious horses who I like quite a bit. And what you're seeing here with Gun Pilot and Skelly, they could win this field. They could get these, they could win this. And this is more of an open field in the sprint than it has been the last couple of years. And the last couple of years, you've had Elite Power. You even had Gunite, who's kind of run second and run well. But you've had some pretty dominant sprinters. And it feels like this division's a little bit more wide open suddenly than we've seen in the past. We'll take a good look at Gun Pilot first. And this is a horse that I think has kind of grown on me a little bit. I don't know if this horse is good enough to win, but this is certainly a very honest horse, 9 for 13 in the exacta with 5 wins, but is coming off a loss to Mulligan in the forego last time out and finished third before that to Baby Yoda. Did win the Churchill Downs Stakes, but going back to May. But this is one, like I said, we're going to watch that effort against Mulligan. And this is an example of Mulligan just had everything was perfect. I mean, just got out up front and just said, see you later, basically, to everybody, and was able to pull away. And Gun Pilot is the number one. And Gun Pilot's really trying here. And I'll say Gun Pilot, out of everybody else in this race, and there were some other nice horses in this race, Gun Pilot was really giving chase. And you could see, started to separate himself from the other pack of horses behind him. But nobody was catching Mulligan that day on the front end. And my concern is, just how good is Gun Pilot? Like I said, I think he's an honest horse. I don't know if he's an elite horse, though. Does have that grade 1 in the Churchill Downs Stakes. Over Hear My Song and Zozos. I mean, those aren't necessarily big names or horses that I have a huge opinion of. Did earn a 101 buyer speed figure for that race. And, the 6 furlong distance has traditionally been good for him. 2 victories and 3 starts with a second. And again, this feels like a race that is maybe a little lesser than some of the other races. Now, the horse that is probably going to be Asmussen's favorite in this race, maybe not the overall favorite, but certainly one of them, is Skelly. Skelly is such an interesting horse because Skelly has started to get in this habit of not breaking that well. And you've seen this happen the last couple of times. Now, if you just look at the running lines, you'd go, well, Matthew, he's first at every call. Doesn't seem like he's having any problems breaking. And yet, if you watch it, he does. He kind of breaks a little slower. He breaks, kind of in a little bit, or he's just had some issues at the gate. And then he kind of gets rushed up by Ricardo Santana Jr., and he gets up to the lead by first call. But it is fascinating to see. He's had some of those issues, and what's ended up happening is he started to fade. This is a horse that has finished second now the last 3 times out as your, in order, 1 to 4, even money favorite. So he's starting to burn some money. And this is a horse that, again, has not faced a lot of grade 1 competition. And, really went up and the one grade 1 race he had this year was in the Alfred G. Vanderbilt, finished second in Nakatomi, who's also in this race. Went over and ran in the Riyadh Dirt Sprint. And what happened there? Lost to the Japanese horse Remake, who's in this race as well. So he's lost to some horses that are in this race as well. The horses he's beaten, they're nice horses. Don't get me wrong. Tejano Twist, Mish, Happy as a Choice. These are nice horses. Hear My Song. But they're certainly not elite sprinters, I would say. Now, what is elite is that his speed figures have been incredibly consistent throughout his career, going back to his time at Oaklawn. And that has been, I think, a question for him, which is he a product of Oaklawn Park? Because at Oaklawn, he is darn near impossible to beat. Everywhere else, he can be beat. it's interesting. Last year, you go back and look at his record at Oaklawn last year. And, there was a race in the slop that I'm willing to draw a line through. And then he kind of got blitzed by Osborne in an allowance race. But after that, he reeled off, 4 straight wins at Oaklawn Park, then goes and wins at Lone Star, then comes back and wins 2 more at Oaklawn Park, goes to Riyadh, loses to Remake, comes back, wins 2 more at Oaklawn Park, and then runs Churchill, Saratoga, Churchill, and finishes second all 3 times. Again, it's not Hot Springs, Arkansas. So that could be an issue. And, what we're going to see here in this last race is in that Louisville Thoroughbred Society race, losing to Happy as a choice. At this point, you think he's got it. He's up on the lead. You go, he's got this race in hand. He's your even money favorite. He should draw off at this point. He's had a relatively easy time doing it. The fractions have not been that unreasonable. And now here comes 2 horses gaining. And Hear My Song on the outside gets him at the wire. And I'll be honest, the 6 that day, or Happy as a Choice gets him, Hear My Song is the 6 on the inside, who was also making up ground there. Now, those 3 horses ran big races, no doubt about it. And maybe Skelly can just go to the front and blitz him and never look back. But I still do have some questions about this horse, just because of the way this horse has sometimes started in races and the level of competition. So has been a really good horse, and he's come through a lot. Don't get me wrong. He's won a lot of races. He likes to win, but he wins a lot at Oaklawn Park. I think 8 of those 10 victories in his career are at Oaklawn Park. So something you got to keep in mind, I think, with a horse like Skelly for this year's Breeders' Cup Sprint. Listen, that's going to do it for looking at Steve Asmussen's Contenders. It's an interesting group. It's a group that is in some ways still defined by Gun Runner and Curlin because of, who he's got in, the offspring now of Gun Runner and Curlin in some of these races. And Asmussen, like I said, has had success shipping out to Del Mar. So we will see how he does in these sprint races before. Could be a big weekend with him and Cogburn. Maybe a horse like Society. Maybe a horse like Skelly. Possible he sweeps the sprint divisions. That would be really interesting to see if he was able to do that on Saturday. But he's going to be facing some tough competition in all 3 of those races, but should be a lot of fun to watch. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me today. Make sure to like and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel, and make sure to sign up for NYRA Bets. If you haven't already, we got a lot of great sign-up bonuses too. Deposit match, $25 free bet, and then we got loads of promotions for next Friday and Saturday. Hit and splits, all sorts of good stuff. So definitely make sure to check that all out on NYRA Bets. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.